Lila had always loved quiet Friday evenings, when the world seemed to slow just enough for her to breathe, when the soft hum of the city outside mingled with the faint scent of jasmine candles she lit around the house, filling every corner with a calming warmth, and she had just curled into her favorite chair with a cup of tea, letting the steam rise and the warmth soothe her, thinking about how ordinary yet perfect this evening was when the sudden ring of the doorbell made her heart skip a beat because she wasn't expecting anyone, and the sound felt sharper, urgent somehow, slicing through the calm she had been savoring. And when she opened the door, she saw Jonah, her husband's longtime friend, standing there with that familiar face she had always known but somehow seemed different tonight, his eyes carrying something heavier than usual, his hands slightly fidgeting, his stance tense, as if the air around him carried a secret he could no longer contain, and he looked at her. His voice low and deliberate when he said, "Can we talk for a moment?" And Lila felt a shiver run down her spine because there was nothing casual in his tone, no hint of the easy, familiar friendliness she was used to, only a quiet weight that pressed on her chest and made her invite him inside without a word, guiding him to the living room where the warm light of the lamps cast long shadows across the walls, and she noticed how different he seemed, how his usually confident posture was slightly hunched, how his gaze avoided meeting hers for more than a second, and she wondered what could have brought him here at this hour, why he looked so troubled, and when she finally asked what was wrong, he only shook his head, a sad, almost apologetic movement, and whispered, "I need to tell you something I never meant to keep hidden." And that simple admission made her heart race because it carried the weight of confession, of truth that had been locked away, and she felt a mixture of fear, curiosity, and a strange anticipation, like standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure what lay below but compelled to look anyway, and she poured him a cup of tea, her hands slightly trembling, and watched as he sat down, carefully placing the cup on the table, his eyes still avoiding hers, and she noticed the small details that seemed different, the way his fingers drummed lightly on the edge of the cup, the way his lips pressed together in thought, the way his shoulders, usually relaxed, were tense as if carrying an invisible burden, and she felt a pang of empathy, realizing that something deep and personal was about to be shared, something that could change the way she viewed him, or perhaps herself, because Jonah had always been part of her life, a constant presence alongside her husband, someone she trusted, laughed with, and sometimes confided in, but now there was a barrier, a tension that had never been there before, and she wondered if she had ever imagined what might be hidden behind his friendly demeanor, never suspecting the depths of emotion that could exist quietly beneath, and as she waited, the silence in the room grew heavy, punctuated only by the soft ticking of the wall clock and the faint hum of the city outside, and Jonah finally spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "I've carried this for a long time, and I can't keep it to myself anymore," and she felt a shiver run through her, not out of fear, but out of the sudden awareness that the ordinary evening she had planned was over, that something delicate and fragile had entered the room, something that could not be undone, and she listened carefully as he gathered his thoughts, pausing, searching for the right words, his eyes flickering with a vulnerability that startled her, because she had never seen Jonah like this, never witnessed the man who was always confident and jovial now stripped down to a raw emotional honesty, and in that moment Lila realized that life could shift in an instant, that a single conversation could tilt the world just enough to leave her heart unsettled, fluttering like a bird trapped between hope and fear, and she noticed how the air itself seemed to hold its breath as he finally said, I've felt something for you for a long time," and Lila's mind went blank for a heartbeat because the words were unexpected, a confession she never thought she would hear, and yet they carried no demand, no pressure, only the simple, painful honesty of someone who had loved quietly, unseen, unnoticed, and her chest ached in a strange way, a mixture of sympathy, surprise, and the inexplicable tug of something familiar yet forbidden. And Jonah's eyes met hers briefly, seeking understanding, perhaps forgiveness, perhaps just the acknowledgement that he had dared to speak, and she felt a tremor in her heart, a gentle stirring that frightened her, because the emotions were real, yet complicated, layered with loyalty, friendship, and the invisible boundaries of commitment she had always honored, and she sipped her tea, trying to steady her voice, trying to find the words that could match the weight of his revelation, trying to reassure him without betraying her own whirlwind of thoughts, and she realized that sometimes, life presented moments that were not about action, but about understanding, about feeling the truth without letting it destroy the delicate balance of relationships, and Jonah continued, explaining how he had kept his feelings hidden all these years, never wanting to interfere, never wanting to hurt anyone, never daring to cross the lines that separated love from loyalty. And as he spoke, the room seemed to shrink around them, the world outside fading, until it was just the two of them and this fragile emotional truth hanging in the air. And Lila felt tears prick her eyes, not out of sadness alone, but out of the strange beauty of honesty, the courage it took to reveal such a secret, and the bittersweet pain of realizing that love could exist quietly, deeply, and remain unseen, unacknowledged, yet no less real. And she thought about her husband, about their life together, about the trust and love they shared, and how this revelation could not destroy what they had, yet it demanded recognition, a nod to the human heart's complexity. And she finally found her voice, soft but steady, saying, "Thank you for telling me." And Jonah nodded, a small, relieved exhale escaping him, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly as if sharing this secret had lifted an invisible weight. And they sat there in the quiet, sipping tea, letting the moment linger, heavy with unspoken understanding, the kind that only comes when hearts speak truths that words can barely hold. And as the night deepened, Lila realized that even ordinary evenings could carry extraordinary revelations, that friendship could mask deeper currents, that love could be silent yet powerful, and that the world could shift quietly in a single conversation, leaving the heart both unsettled and strangely grateful. And as Jonah finally rose to leave, offering a small, grateful smile, she felt a mix of emotions: relief, curiosity, and the lingering warmth of an honesty that, even in its complexity, had deepened her understanding of the human heart. And as the door closed behind him, she sat back, her mind racing, her heart heavy yet alive, knowing that life, love, and friendship were rarely simple, that emotions often moved in quiet, unexpected ways, and that sometimes just knowing the truth, even without acting on it, could change everything, leaving a gentle ache that was both painful and beautiful. And as she finally set her tea aside and leaned back into the soft cushions, she realized that this ordinary evening had become extraordinary, a night marked by honesty, vulnerability, and the fragile, tender power of the human heart. Lila sat in stunned silence, the echo of Jonah's words still lingering in the room, a gentle tremor running through her heart as she tried to process what he had just revealed, the fact that someone she had always considered a friend, someone who had shared countless dinners, laughter, and casual conversations with her and her husband, could have harbored feelings so quietly, so deeply, for so long. And as she looked at him, she noticed the vulnerability in his eyes, the way his hands clasped nervously in his lap, the slight quiver in his voice when he admitted how long he had kept this secret, and she felt a mix of emotions she hadn't expected: surprise, confusion, a strange tenderness, and even a little guilt for feeling her pulse quickened despite the circumstances. And Jonah continued, carefully choosing his words, explaining that he had never intended to disrupt her life, that he respected her marriage, that his feelings had been nothing more than quiet admiration and longing, a sentiment he carried in the silence, observing from the sidelines, loving from a distance while never crossing boundaries, never letting his affection become a burden or a threat. And as he spoke, Lila felt her chest tighten, a swirl of emotions mixing in her mind, the weight of this confession settling over her like a warm, heavy blanket, simultaneously comforting and suffocating. And she thought about all the time she had laughed at his jokes, all the evenings they had spent together with her husband, never suspecting the depth of feeling hidden beneath his smiles, and a pang of empathy and curiosity pierced her heart, making her want to reach out, to understand, to reassure, but also to protect herself from the storm of emotions. This revelation stirred, and Jonah, sensing her reaction, paused, allowing the silence to stretch, giving her space to breathe, space to feel, space to decide how to respond. And Lila noticed the subtle ways he tried to appear composed, the way he straightened slightly in his chair, the faint tension in his shoulders, the nervous shifting of his weight, all signals of someone holding back a torrent of emotion, someone terrified of judgment yet compelled by honesty. And she realized in that moment how difficult it must have been for him to carry such feelings for years, to witness her life unfold, to see the love she shared with her husband, and to hold a secret that could never be fully expressed, a love both powerful and restrained. And as she processed this, she felt a strange connection, a recognition of the human heart's complexity, the way emotions often refuse to fit neatly into the boundaries of social expectation or personal circumstance. And she found herself leaning slightly forward, drawn into the gravity of the confession, wanting to understand, to witness, to honor the courage it had taken for him to speak. And Jonah, emboldened by her attentive silence, admitted that there had been countless nights when he thought about revealing his feelings, when he imagined different outcomes, when he questioned whether honesty would bring relief or pain, and he confessed that he had never acted on these emotions because he respected her choices, her life, her happiness, and because he knew that love in its truest form sometimes meant sacrifice and restraint. And as he spoke, Lila felt her heart ache with a delicate sorrow, the bittersweet realization that someone could love her so profoundly without ever asking for anything in return, without ever seeking to claim or possess, a love pure in its devotion yet impossible in its fulfillment. And she marveled at the paradox, the tension between desire and morality, between longing and loyalty, and she found herself empathizing with him, feeling the weight of years of quiet emotion and understanding, in a way that was almost painful, the courage it took to simply speak the truth, to lay bare the heart without expecting reciprocation. And as the minutes stretched into hours, their conversation deepened, evolving from confession into reflection, into a shared contemplation of life, love, and the human capacity for complex emotion. And Lila found herself revealing fragments of her own heart, her own fears, her own unspoken longings, not in the way of romantic response, but in the way of honest connection, acknowledging the truth of human feeling without crossing boundaries. And Jonah listened with an intensity that made her feel both seen and understood, a rare comfort in a moment so emotionally charged. And she realized that intimacy could exist without romance, that connection could be profound even when desire remained unacted upon. And the room seemed suspended, time slowing as they navigated the delicate territory between honesty and discretion, between emotion and ethics, between what was felt and what could safely exist. And Lila's mind raced with questions and reflections, thinking about the nuances of loyalty, the strength of marriage, the complexities of human attraction, and the beauty and danger of unspoken love. And Jonah, sensing her contemplation, offered gentle reassurances, emphasizing that his goal was never to create turmoil, only to release the burden of hidden truth, to honor both her life and his own emotions by acknowledging them openly. And Lila felt a swell of admiration and compassion, realizing that sometimes love was not about action, but about acknowledgement, about respect, about understanding the boundaries while honoring the depth of feeling. And as the evening deepened, they shared small stories, memories of times past, moments of shared laughter, and reflections on friendship and trust, each word carrying an unspoken layer of meaning, each glance hinting at the unvoiced emotions beneath. And she noticed how Jonah's presence filled the room with a warmth that was both comforting and stirring, a reminder of the complexity of human connection. And she felt her pulse quicken, not from temptation, but from the intensity of shared honesty, the raw vulnerability that exists when one human being entrusts another with the truth of their heart. And as she absorbed his words, she found herself reflecting on her own life, on the moments of quiet longing, of suppressed emotion, of unspoken desires that sometimes fluttered beneath the surface. And she realized that the heart often holds contradictions, loves many things in many ways, and yet chooses loyalty and morality even when longing persists. And Jonah, sensing her engagement, continued to speak with gentle intensity, recalling memories of their shared years, of small gestures and fleeting moments that had been significant to him. And she felt the weight of those memories, the tenderness and melancholy of unrequited feeling. And a soft ache stirred in her chest, a mixture of empathy, admiration, and quiet wonder at the human heart's capacity to love deeply without expectation. And as the night wore on, the conversation moved to the nature of friendship, the boundaries of respect, and the courage it took to love silently. And Lila realized that the evening was transforming into a lesson in empathy, in understanding, in witnessing someone's soul with compassion and clarity. And she felt her own emotions deepen, a subtle reflective warmth mingling with the lingering surprise and tension. And Jonah's eyes held a quiet hope, not for romantic reciprocation, but for acknowledgement, for understanding, for the simple acceptance of a truth long buried. And she gave him that, offering a nod, a smile, a gentle word, a reassurance that his honesty mattered, that it had been heard, that it was respected. And as they sat together, enveloped in the soft glow of the living room, sharing the intimacy of vulnerability without overstepping boundaries, Lila felt a complex mix of emotions: relief, admiration, sorrow, tenderness, and a quiet fascination with the depth of human feeling. And she realized that this moment, though delicate and fraught, had brought them closer in a way that was both safe and profound. that understanding another's heart could be as powerful as any romance, that love could exist quietly, respectfully, and meaningfully without altering the surface of everyday life. And Jonah, sensing the completion of his confession, began to rise, his expression soft but resolute, his heart lighter for having shared the truth, and as he stood, their eyes met in a long silent exchange, a shared understanding that transcended words, and Lila felt her own heart respond, not with romantic desire, but with recognition of courage, of honesty, of the quiet beauty of unspoken devotion. And as he left, stepping out into the night, she sat back, the weight of their conversation settling in her chest, a mixture of melancholy and clarity, a gentle ache that lingered, a reminder that life was rarely simple, that hearts could carry truths too profound to act upon yet too important to ignore, and she realized that some connections, though never romantic, could change the way one sees life, love, and loyalty forever, leaving an indelible mark on the soul. And as she finally rose to the window, watching the stars blink softly in the dark sky, she understood that tonight was not about choices or consequences, but about witnessing truth, about honoring emotion, and about recognizing the delicate, bittersweet power of the human heart. The night had deepened into a quiet stillness when Lila finally allowed herself to sit back and breathe, the echo of Jonah's confession still swirling in her mind, a gentle ache lingering in her chest, a mixture of empathy, curiosity, and an unexpected tenderness she had never anticipated, and she realized that even as he had left, his presence seemed to hang in the room like a soft shadow, a reminder of truths spoken and feelings shared. And she thought about how delicate human hearts could be, how easily love could exist quietly, unacknowledged yet real, and how sometimes life presented moments that were less about action and more about understanding, about witnessing emotion without letting it disrupt the fabric of everyday life. And as she leaned back into the cushions, her thoughts wandered to her husband, to the life they had built together, the trust, the warmth, and the laughter, and she felt an intense appreciation for what she had while also acknowledging the complexity of her feelings toward Jonah, a combination of respect, admiration, and the subtle stirrings of something entirely human, a recognition of the courage it took to reveal a hidden heart. And she reflected on the hours of conversation, the depth of honesty, the moments of silence where unspoken understanding passed between them, and she realized that emotional intimacy could exist without romance, that connection could be profound even when desire remained unacted upon. And as dawn approached, soft light filtering through the curtains, she felt a strange peace settle over her, a sense that even complicated emotions could be honored safely, that hearts could carry truths without allowing them to fracture the lives they touched. And Lila thought about how Jonah's love, though never acted upon, had given her insight into the human heart, its capacity for quiet devotion, sacrifice, and the courage to speak honestly, and she marveled at the paradox of unrequited affection, how it could be painful yet beautiful, and how it could teach empathy, patience, and the delicate power of listening. And she remembered the way his eyes had met hers, the flicker of vulnerability, the careful honesty, and she realized that courage could take many forms, sometimes shown in grand gestures, sometimes in the simple act of telling the truth, and she felt grateful that he had trusted her with this, that he had chosen to honor her by sharing what had been hidden for so long. And as she sipped the cold remains of her tea, she thought about the subtle lessons embedded in human relationships, how love and loyalty could coexist even when longing persisted, how people could carry deep feelings in silence without allowing them to harm or disrupt, and she reflected on her own heart, the capacity to feel empathy and tenderness without yielding to temptation, the ability to witness truth without crossing boundaries, and the understanding that some connections are meant not for fulfillment but for recognition, for the gentle acknowledgement of what it means to care deeply and honestly. And she felt the bittersweet ache of knowing that Jonah's affection would remain unrequited, yet that its existence was no less meaningful, no less real, because love in its purest form sometimes asks only to be seen, only to be respected, only to be honored in quiet without demand. And she thought about the way life often unfolded in moments like this, moments that challenged perceptions, tested boundaries, and revealed the depth of human emotion in its rawest, most authentic form. And she realized that strength lay not only in the ability to act but in the ability to feel, to empathize, to honor, and to restrain when necessary. And the morning light now bathed the room in gentle warmth, the soft hum of the waking city filling the silence as she contemplated what had passed, the mixture of sorrow, relief, admiration, and quiet fascination. and she reflected on the beauty of restraint, the courage of honesty, the delicate interplay between longing and loyalty, and she felt a profound respect for Jonah, for the years of silent devotion, for the careful boundaries he had maintained, for the bravery it took to finally speak, and she realized that sometimes human connection was less about fulfillment and more about understanding, about witnessing courage, about honoring the depth of emotion that existed even when it could not be claimed or acted upon, and she marveled at the way the human heart could love fully, silently and selflessly, teaching lessons about empathy, patience, and the complex beauty of emotional truth. And as she rose to glance out the window at the soft morning light, she felt a sense of clarity settle over her, a quiet understanding that tonight had changed her, not in the world she lived in outwardly, but in the way she perceived honesty, courage, and the invisible threads that connect hearts. And she thought about the delicate tension that had filled the room, the intimacy of vulnerability shared without crossing lines, the lessons in empathy and recognition, and she realized that life often presented these moments to remind us of the power of truth, the subtle strength of restraint, and the quiet beauty of human emotion, and she felt a gentle warmth for having witnessed it, a soft ache for the unspoken longing, and a deep appreciation for the bravery it took to love silently, to honor boundaries, and to speak honestly, and she knew that this night would linger in her memory, a quiet testament to the complexity and richness of human connection, the tenderness of shared vulnerability, and the emotional depth that sometimes exists between people in ways that words cannot fully capture, and she felt a peaceful awareness that such moments, though fleeting and delicate, could leave lasting impressions on the soul, shaping understanding, deepening empathy, and reminding one that love in all its forms is worthy of respect, acknowledgement, and honor. And as she finally set aside her thoughts and allowed herself to breathe fully, the sun rising higher, the city waking, the world moving on outside her window, she felt a quiet, lasting impression of Jonah's confession, of the delicate interplay of emotions that had passed, and she understood that life, love, and friendship often carry hidden currents, subtle yet powerful, that teach us about courage, honesty, and the gentle, bittersweet beauty of the human heart, and she smiled softly, a mixture of melancholy and gratitude in her chest, knowing that some truths do not demand action to matter, that some connections change us simply by existing, and that the night's events, tender and poignant, would forever shape the way she viewed honesty, emotion, and the quiet power of love that is felt deeply, honored respectfully, and remembered forever.